Now, following weeks of anti-government protests, Kenyan President William Ruto dissolved the majority of the cabinet last month and introduced a vetting process for new ministers. Several nominees have already appeared before a parliamentary committee since Thursday and will conclude on Sunday. The parliamentary vetting, which began on Thursday, took place against the backdrop of public murmurs over integrity of some of the nominees. The retention of 6 persons who served in the cabinet dismissed on July 11, and the inclusion of opposition leaders in what is said to be a team of rivals. Now, at least one petition has been filed in a local court seeking to bar the 4 opposition members from taking their positions in the new cabinet, while the country's official anti-corruption body wrote a letter to Parliament opposing the appointment of one of the nominees it says is under investigation for corruption. Meanwhile, citizens have warned the Kenyan Parliament against approving individuals implicated in corruption for appointment to the cabinet. Now, joining us on the news to discuss this development is Tele Nzomo, Program Officer at Siasa Place from Nairobi. Thank you so much, Tele, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Now, Tele, giving the warnings against including corrupt individuals, what would you say the criteria should be that the President Ruto would consider when selecting his new cabinet members?
I think he's already selected the new cabinet. Now the process is in Parliament, where now Parliament just has to approve. I think in as far as the criteria he was using, it was more of he was looking at the political nature of what's going on in the country. And I think that what he was doing was basically just trying to bring on board other parties, and more specifically ODM, which is the second biggest party in Parliament, and trying to ensure that he has, I guess, more support, especially considering how bad the demonstrations were. I think he's looking at himself from a political side, almost a way of ensuring the survival of his government. So the criteria he used was just trying to bring in the major parties together, at the same time also trying to deal with the issues that he may be having with his own party, and trying to deal with it. So it's been, his criteria has been very, very political, which I think is unfortunate. It should have been more about service delivery, but I don't think that was what he considered first.
Right. And what are the expectations from the Kenyan public regarding the new cabinet?
Right now, the expectations were that we would have a government, as I mentioned before, the issue of service delivery, having a cabinet that is delivering for the people. I think people wanted less politicians in the cabinet. They wanted to see more technocrats. They wanted to see people who had experience in the relative in the relative dockets or in the relative fields, but we didn't necessarily get that from the new cabinet, and what we are seeing is more of the political angle, as I was mentioning before. But the expectation from people is that there will be service delivery, there'll be less issues on corruption, but we'll see how that works with the new team.
All right. Also, how significant would you say the challenge of managing rivals in Parliament for President Ruto is? What are the strategies that he might employ to foster collaborations or mitigate the opposition?
Yeah, so far what he has done is to actually try and bring the opposition on board. As I mentioned, that he has picked a number of cabinet secretaries from the ODM, which is Raila Odinga's party. That's the second largest party also in the National Assembly and in Parliament as a whole. So he's tried his best. He's brought them on board, I think, to reduce the amount of issues that he will face from the opposition. But there's still a number of political parties that refused to the call to join what he wanted to set up as a government of national unity. That's the Wiper Party, Jubilee Party, and other parties within Azimio. But I think by bringing on board ODM, I think he's put himself in a very strong position. I think a lot of the members of ODM will likely be working with or voting for government government, even in Parliament. The other angle that he may have to deal with is the internal wrangles with his own party. Before the protests, there were already issues of falling out between the president and his deputy. So that is, I think, where he'll be really looking at. He'll be looking at more how does he try and deal with the people within his party who he may consider to be rebels.
All right. I think my final question will be, how will the composition of this new cabinet affect President Ruto's governance and his implementation of his policies, especially in light of the protests?
Interestingly enough, there are a number of people who he has appointed who, in the lead up to this process, were very much anti-government policy. One good example is the nominee to Treasury, John Badi. John Badi, who has been in Parliament now for quite a while, when he was in Parliament, was very vocal that he didn't think the policies that government were putting in board were the right policies. So it's now going to be interesting to see now these individuals who in the past were very much against government policy, who in the past were opposing William Ruto and opposing what William Ruto was saying. It's going to be interesting to see, are they still going to take that stand? Are we going to see them agree with the president, or rather work with the president in as far as the president's policies? Or are we going to now start seeing government coming on board and saying, okay, we accept that we had challenges, we accept that there's some policies, especially fiscal policies, regarding how much money we're spending, and now looking at bringing in new policies. So it's going to be very interesting to see how these new cabinet secretaries, especially the ones who are leading the economic dockets, a lot of them were, as I mentioned, were opposed to the president and to the policies that he's had so far.
All right, Tele Nzomo, Program Officer, Siasa Place, joining us from Nairobi. Thank you so much for giving us more insight into this development.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.